The howling wind battered the isolated cabin as Violet Paxton huddled beneath her threadbare quilt, the fire in her hearth reduced to dying embers that could scarcely hold back the unforgiving Montana winter of 1878. The townspeople's warnings echoed in her mind. A woman alone won't last a month out there, especially not with winter coming. She'd been determined to prove them wrong, but as the snow piled higher outside her door, entombing her in a prison of ice and silence, Violet was beginning to fear they might have been right after all. Violet had arrived in Silver Creek 6 months earlier, a 23-year-old widow with nothing but a deed to a homestead her late husband had purchased sight unseen. The locals had shaken their heads when she declared her intention to claim the property, a small cabin nestled in the foothills, miles from town. Men twice her age with half her determination had failed to tame that unforgiving stretch of territory. What chance did a city-bred woman from Boston have? "Your husband's dead and gone, Mrs. Paxton," Mayor Collins had told her, not unkindly. "Sell the deed while you can still get something for it. Winter here isn't like back east, it's a living thing with teeth and claws." But Violet had been stubborn. After losing her husband Robert to typhoid on their journey west, she had nothing to return to in Boston. No family, no prospects, and no desire to be anyone's charity case. The deed was all she had left, and she would make it work or die trying. As December descended, she was beginning to fear the latter was more likely. The storm had raged for 3 days straight, piling snow higher than her windows. Her wood supply, which she'd thought ample, was dwindling faster than anticipated. Game had grown scarce, and the preserved foods she'd put away for winter wouldn't last until spring at the rate she was consuming them. Each morning, she fought her way outside to check her traps, usually finding them empty. Today she hadn't even been able to open her door against the snow. The thought of being buried alive sent panic coursing through her veins. "I will not die here," Violet whispered, her breath visible in the frigid air. "I will not give them the satisfaction." But determination alone couldn't melt snow or fill her pantry. As darkness fell on the 4th night of the blizzard, Violet added the last log to her fire and watched the flames take hold, casting flickering shadows across the rough-hewn walls. She began calculating how long she could survive by eating only 1 meal a day, then half a meal. How many days before starvation began to set in? How long before the cold took her, sleep came fitfully, interrupted by the cracking of branches outside as they surrendered beneath the weight of accumulated snow? In her dreams, she was running through endless white fields, pursued by wolves with eyes like ice and the faces of the townspeople who had predicted her demise. She awoke to silence. The absence of the wind's howl was so sudden and complete that it jolted her from slumber more effectively than any noise could have. The storm had finally broken. Weak morning light filtered through the frost-covered windows, casting the cabin in a pale glow that did little to dispel the chill. Violet rose stiffly, wrapping her quilt around her shoulders. She needed to dig herself out to check her traps to find more firewood before night fell again. The fire had died completely, leaving only cold ashes in the hearth. Moving to the door, she pushed against it. It didn't budge. She pushed harder, throwing her slight weight against the wood. Nothing. The snow had sealed her inside as effectively as any lock and key. Panic bubbled up in her throat. She moved to the window, wiping away the frost with her sleeve. All she could see was white. Snow had piled nearly to the top of her window. She was entombed. "Keep calm," she told herself, though her voice sounded strange in the silence. "Think." The cabin had a small rear window in the bedroom. Perhaps there was less snow there. She hurried to check, but found the situation no better. The chimney, if she could somehow climb up and out, but that was madness. The flue was too narrow, and even if she could squeeze through, she'd likely freeze to death on the roof before she could dig her way down. Resigned, Violet returned to her bed. She would have to wait and hope the snow melted enough for her to force the door open. But with temperatures well below freezing, that could take days, and she had no food left, no firewood. As the reality of her situation sank in, tears stung her eyes. "So this is how it ends," she whispered. Not with a fight, but buried in snow. The irony wasn't lost on her. Robert had dragged her west with promises of wide, open spaces and freedom from the constraints of Boston society. Now she would die in the smallest space imaginable, trapped by the very wilderness that was supposed to liberate her. Hours passed. Violet drifted in and out of sleep, conserving her energy. The cold had settled into her bones, making her joints ache. Her stomach had long since stopped growling, having accepted that no food would be forthcoming. Then, sometime in the late afternoon, she heard a sound so unexpected that at first she thought she was dreaming, the muffled crunch of snow beneath boots, the soft nickering of a horse. "Hello." She called, her voice cracking from disuse. "Is someone there? Help me," she scrambled to the door, pounding on it with her fists. "Hello, I'm trapped inside." For a terrifying moment, there was only silence, and Violet feared she'd imagined the sounds. Then came the unmistakable sound of a shovel biting into snow. "Stand back from the door, madam," a deep voice called. "I'm digging you out." Tears of relief streamed down Violet's face as she pressed her ear against the wood, listening to her rescuer work. The steady rhythm of the shovel was the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. It took nearly an hour before the door finally creaked open, sending a cascade of snow onto the cabin floor. Standing in the newly cleared doorway was a tall figure silhouetted against the blinding white landscape. "You all right in there, madam?" the man asked, stepping into the cabin and removing his hat. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face wind-burned and stubbled with several days' growth of beard. Dark hair curled from beneath a battered cowboy hat, and his eyes, a startling blue against his tanned skin, assessed her with concern. "I'm alive," Violet managed, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance, "which is more than I expected to be by nightfall. Thank you, mister." "Owens," he supplied. "Owen Jameson, most folks just call me Owen." His gaze swept the cold hearth, the bare cupboards. "You've been in a bad way, I reckon." "Violet Paxton," she replied, "and yes, I suppose I have." Owen nodded, then turned back to the door. "Let me fetch some firewood from my pack. Got some provisions, too. You look like you could use a hot meal." Before Violet could respond, he had disappeared back into the snow. She sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. Minutes later, Owen returned with an armful of split logs and a canvas bag that he set on the table. "Not much," he said apologetically, "but it should warm you up while I bring in more wood." With efficient movements, he built a fire, coaxing the flames to life with a skill that spoke of long experience in the wilderness. Violet watched him work, too exhausted and grateful to offer help. Soon, the fire was crackling merrily, and the cabin began to shed its deadly chill. Owen pulled a pot from his saddlebag and set it near the fire. "Coffee," he explained, "and I've got some jerky and hardtack. It's trail food, but it's better than nothing." "It's better than anything I've had in days," Violet said sincerely. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Jameson." "Owen," he corrected gently, "and no thanks needed. Couldn't very well ride past a cabin buried in snow without checking if anyone was inside." He paused. "Though I'll admit I'm surprised to find a woman alone out here. Most would have thought that I'd never survive the winter." Violet finished for him. "Yes, everyone in Silver Creek made that perfectly clear." Owen's mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Looks like they almost had the right of it." "Almost," Violet agreed. "But thanks to you, they'll have to hold off on claiming my property a while longer." As the coffee brewed, Owen explained that he was a ranch hand from the Double Cross Ranch south of Silver Creek. He'd been sent to check on cattle at a line camp when the storm hit. Rather than risk getting lost, he'd waited it out at the camp and was now making his way back to report. "Ranch is probably thinking I got myself frozen," he said, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. "Wouldn't be the first hand they lost to a winter like this." Violet sipped the bitter coffee gratefully, feeling life seep back into her limbs. "Will you stay until morning? I don't like to think of you traveling in this weather, especially after saving my life." Owen studied the fading light outside. "Might be best. Snow's still deep and nightfall's coming fast." He looked uncomfortable for a moment. "If that's proper, madam." "I think propriety takes a back seat to survival out here," Violet said. "Besides, I'm a widow, not some sheltered miss whose reputation might be ruined." Something flickered in Owen's eyes, sympathy, perhaps, but he simply nodded. I'll bring in more wood and see to my horse. He's sheltered under your lean-to, hope that's all right. Of course. When Owen stepped outside, Violet pressed her hands to her flushed cheeks. The presence of another person this tall, quiet cowboy with his steady hands and watchful eyes had transformed her death trap into a home again. The cabin suddenly seemed smaller, more intimate with his large frame filling the doorway. By the time darkness fell completely, Owen had stacked enough firewood beside the hearth to last several days and brought in his bedroll, which he laid out respectfully near the door, as far from Violet's bed as the small cabin allowed. Over a simple meal of jerky, hardtack, and the last of Violet's preserves, they talked. Owen was sparing with words but attentive, his gaze rarely leaving her face as she explained how she'd come to be alone in the foothills of Montana territory. My husband died before we ever reached the homestead, she explained. We'd left Boston with such dreams. Robert was going to raise horses. I was going to plant a garden and maybe start a small school once more settlers arrived. She smiled sadly. Foolish dreams, perhaps. Not foolish, Owen said quietly, just harder to achieve than city folk realize. He added more wood to the fire. Why'd you stay? After he passed, I mean, most widows would have gone back east. Violet considered the question. Stubbornness, partly. There was nothing for me in Boston. My parents died years ago, and I have no siblings. And I suppose I wanted to prove I could make it on my own. She laughed without humor. I nearly proved the opposite. You survived until help came, Owen pointed out. That's more than many could say. I suppose. Violet studied him across the firelight. And what about you? What brought you to Montana? Owen was silent for so long that Violet thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, war. After Appomattox, there wasn't much left for me in Georgia. Figured I'd head as far west as I could, start fresh where nobody knew me or cared which side I'd fought for. You were Confederate, he nodded, a wariness entering his expression. My father's brother died at Antietam, Violet said quietly, but that was a lifetime ago, wasn't it? Out here, the past doesn't seem to matter as much. That's why I came, Owen agreed. Out here, a man is judged by how well he rides, how hard he works, how honest his word is, not by which flag he followed when he was young and full of other men's convictions. The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the temperature dropped further, but inside the cabin was warm and growing warmer. You should get some rest, Owen said eventually. Tomorrow, if the weather holds, I'll help you dig out proper, make sure you've got enough supplies to last until I can come back with more. Violet's heart skipped at the mention of his return. You'd come back. Can't very well save you from freezing to death only to let you starve, now can I? There was a hint of teasing in his voice, the first lightness she'd heard from him. I suppose not, she replied, smiling despite herself. That would be terribly inefficient. Owen's low chuckle followed her as she retired to her bed, drawing the quilt around her shoulders. For the first time in days, she fell asleep without fear clutching at her heart. The morning brought clear skies and sunshine that turned the snow-covered landscape into a blinding sea of white. Violet woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Owen moving quietly around the cabin. He'd already stoked the fire and was frying what looked like slices of salt pork in her cast-iron skillet. Hope I didn't wake you, he said when he noticed her watching. Thought you could use a proper breakfast. It smells wonderful, Violet said, suddenly aware of her rumpled appearance. She smoothed her hair as best she could and straightened her dress before joining him at the table. After breakfast, they set to work. Owen dug paths from the cabin to the outhouse and the small shed where Violet kept her tools. He checked the roof for damage from the snow's weight and reinforced the lean to where his horse stood patiently. Violet worked alongside him, refusing to be treated as helpless despite his initial protests. Together, they gathered more firewood from the nearby trees, Owen wielding the axe while Violet stacked the split logs. By midday, the cabin and its surroundings were functional again. They paused to share a simple lunch, sitting on a fallen log that Owen had cleared of snow. I should head back to the ranch, he said reluctantly. They'll be wondering if I survived the storm. Violet nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. The prospect of being alone again, even with the immediate danger past, filled her with dread. Of course. You've done more than enough already. Owen studied her face. I'll be back in 3 days with supplies, he promised. Can you make do until then? Yes, Violet assured him. Thanks to you. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a revolver. Do you know how to use this? Violet eyed the weapon warily. I've never fired a gun. It's loaded, Owen said, holding it out to her. Just in case, there are wolves in these hills and occasionally men who are worse than wolves. Their fingers brushed as she accepted the weapon, sending an unexpected spark of warmth up her arm. I'll return it when you come back, she said. Owen nodded, his eyes lingering on her face as if committing it to memory. 3 days, he repeated. If the weather turns again and I'm delayed, don't worry, I'll come as soon as I can. I know you will, Violet said, and was surprised to realize she truly believed it. This stranger who had appeared like a miracle in the snow had somehow, in less than a day, become someone she trusted with her life. She watched from the doorway as he mounted his horse, a sturdy roan gelding with a white blaze. Owen tipped his hat to her, then turned the horse toward the south and disappeared into the trees. The cabin felt impossibly empty in his absence. True to his word, Owen returned on the 3rd day, his horse laden with supplies. Flour, sugar, coffee, bacon, beans, ammunition, candles, even a small bag of hard candies that he presented to Violet with an almost boyish shyness. Thought you might like something sweet, he said, looking away as if embarrassed by the gesture. Thank you, Violet said, touched by his thoughtfulness. Won't you come in? I've made stew. Owen followed her inside, ducking his tall frame through the doorway. The cabin had been transformed in his absence. Violet had scrubbed every surface, hung fresh curtains made from an old dress, and arranged pine boughs in a jar to bring a touch of green to the winter-bound space. Place looks nice, Owen commented, removing his hat. Homey. Amazing what a difference it makes not to be dying of cold and hunger, Violet said lightly, though the memory of those desperate days still chilled her. Over dinner, Owen explained that he'd told his boss, Mr. Richards, about Violet's situation. He says you're welcome to stay at the ranch until spring if you'd like. There's a small cabin for married hands that's empty now. Would be safer than out here alone. Violet considered the offer, tempted by the prospect of company and security. That's very generous, she said slowly. But this is my home. I've put all I have into it. If I leave now, I'm not sure I'd have the courage to come back. Owen nodded as if he'd expected this answer. Then I'll keep checking on you, he said simply. With Mr. Richards' permission, I can ride out every few days. Bring supplies, help with anything that needs doing. Won't that be an imposition? It's a long ride from the ranch. It's no trouble, he said, and the intensity in his blue eyes made Violet look away, her cheeks warming, and so began a new routine. Every 3 or 4 days, Owen would appear on his roan gelding, sometimes staying only long enough to deliver supplies and check that all was well. Other times remaining for hours to help with chores or simply to share a meal and conversation. With each visit, Violet found herself watching the horizon more eagerly, her heart quickening at the first glimpse of rider and horse. Owen, too, seemed to grow more relaxed in her company, his initial reserve gradually giving way to quiet humor and even occasional stories from his past. She learned that he was 30 years old, had fought at Shiloh and Atlanta, and had wandered for 3 years after the war before finding his place at the Double Cross. He spoke little of his family in Georgia, though he once mentioned sisters and a mother he hadn't seen since leaving. In turn, Violet shared memories of her childhood in Boston, her brief marriage to Robert, and her dreams for the homestead. Owen listened with genuine interest, offering practical suggestions for improvements come spring. January gave way to February, and the worst of winter's fury seemed to have passed. The days grew incrementally longer, though the cold remained fierce. Violet's confidence grew with each successful day of survival. She learned to shoot the revolver Owen had lent her, practiced setting traps, and even managed to bring down a rabbit with the old shotgun she found in the shed. It was during a late February snowfall that everything changed. Owen had arrived just ahead of the weather, bringing news that a wolf pack had been sighted in the area. Don't go far from the cabin until we're sure they've moved on, he warned as the first flakes began to fall. The storm intensified quickly, not as severe as the blizzard that had nearly claimed Violet's life, but enough to make travel dangerous. You should stay until it passes, Violet said, peering out at the thickening curtain of white. It wouldn't be safe to ride back in this. Owen agreed, and they settled in for an evening by the fire. The howling wind outside made the cabin seem cozier, the flames brighter. Violet had been experimenting with baking and proudly served a passable apple pie made with dried fruit. "This is real good," Owen said appreciatively. "You've got a talent for it. You're easily impressed after months of your own cooking," Violet teased, but the compliment pleased her. As night deepened, their conversation took a more personal turn. "Do you ever regret coming west?" Owen asked, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, firelight playing across his features. Violet considered the question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "When the wind finds every crack in these walls, or when I'm so lonely I talk to myself just to hear a human voice." She smiled wryly. "But then I think of what my life would have been in Boston, probably working as a seamstress or a governess, always dependent on someone else's charity. At least here I answer to no one but myself." "That's worth something," Owen agreed. "What about you? Do you ever think of going back to Georgia?" A shadow crossed his face. "There's nothing for me there. My family's farm was burned during Sherman's march. My father died at Petersburg. My mother and sisters moved in with an uncle in Alabama." He stared into the fire. "I write to them sometimes, but it's not the same." The boy they knew died in the war, same as thousands of others. The naked pain in his voice moved Violet. Without thinking, she reached across and placed her hand over his. "I'm sorry." Owen looked at their joined hands, then up at her face. Something shifted in his eyes, a decision made, a barrier crossed. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his hand so that their palms met, fingers intertwining. "Violet," he said, his voice low and rough with emotion. "I don't want to overstep, but I need to tell you something." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Yes, these past weeks, riding out to see you, it started as a duty, a way to make sure you were safe, but now—" He searched for words. "Now I find myself counting the hours until I can see you again. I think about you when I should be focusing on my work. I worry when I'm not here." Violet's breath caught. "Owen, you don't have to say anything," he rushed on. "I know it's too soon and I'm just a ranch hand with nothing much to offer a lady like you, but I wanted you to know that you're not alone out here. Not as long as I'm drawing breath." The sincerity in his words, the vulnerability in his expression, broke something open inside Violet. The carefully maintained walls she'd built around her heart since Robert's death crumbled. "I count the hours too," she whispered. "Every time you leave, this cabin feels emptier than before I met you." Owen's grip on her hand tightened. "Violet," he said again, her name a prayer on his lips. Then he was standing, drawing her up with him. His hands, calloused from years of rope and reins, cradled her face as if she were made of precious glass. His eyes asked a question, and her answer was to rise on tiptoe, closing the distance between them. Their first kiss was tentative, a gentle press of lips that conveyed more tenderness than passion. But when Violet's hands found their way to Owen's shoulders, the kiss deepened into something hungry and vital. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I should stop," he murmured. "Why?" Violet asked, her fingers tangled in the hair at the nape of his neck. "Because if I don't stop now, I'm not sure I'll be able to later." His voice was strained. "And you deserve better than a moment of weakness in a snowstorm." Violet pulled back slightly to look into his eyes. "What if it's not weakness? What if it's strength, the strength to admit what we both want?" Owen searched her face. "Are you sure?" In answer, Violet kissed him again with all the certainty she felt. This time there was no hesitation in Owen's response. His arms encircled her waist, lifting her slightly as he deepened the kiss. The storm raged outside, but within the cabin's walls, a different kind of tempest was brewing, one made of longing and discovery, of hands finding bare skin and breaths mingling in the firelit darkness. Later, as they lay tangled together beneath Violet's quilt, Owen traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "I never expected to find you," he said softly. When I saw that snow-covered cabin, I thought I might find a body, not the woman I'd fall in love with." Violet's heart soared at the word love, so casually spoken. "Is that what this is?" she asked, pressing a kiss to his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong beneath her lips. "For me it is," Owen said simply. "Has been for weeks now." "For me too," Violet admitted. "I think I started falling the moment you handed me that gun." Owen's laugh rumbled through his chest. "Most women prefer flowers." "I'm not most women." "No," he agreed, pulling her closer. "You certainly are not." Morning came with clearing skies and a transformed world. Not just outside, where fresh snow draped every tree and bush in crystalline white, but inside the cabin as well, where two people who had been alone for so long had found each other against impossible odds. Owen reluctantly prepared to leave, knowing he was already overdue at the ranch. "I'll be back in 2 days," he promised, kissing Violet thoroughly by the door. "Maybe one if I can manage it." "I'll be waiting," she said, not caring if her smile revealed too much of her heart. As February turned to March, their relationship deepened. Owen's visits became more frequent, and he began bringing materials to improve the cabin: glass for a broken window, tar paper for the roof, seeds for spring planting. Together, they planned for the future, for the garden Violet would plant when the ground thawed, for the repairs Owen would make to the shed and corral. Neither mentioned what would happen when winter ended and Violet no longer needed Owen's protection. The question hung between them, unasked but ever present. It was Mr. Richards who forced the issue, riding out to the cabin himself one mild March day. A gruff man in his 50s with a silver-streaked beard, he appraised Violet with shrewd eyes. "So you're the widow Jameson's been mooning over," he said without preamble. "He's a good man, best hand I've got." "Yes, sir, he is," Violet agreed, offering coffee which the rancher accepted with a nod. "He's asked for a plot on the north section," Richards continued, watching her reaction. "Says he wants to build a place of his own come spring." Violet's hands stilled on the coffee pot. "Did he, mm?" Richards sipped his coffee. "Good man, but stubborn as they come. Won't admit he's in love with you, but it's plain as day. Question is, what are you planning to do about it?" Taken aback by the rancher's directness, Violet fumbled for a response. That is, we haven't discussed." "Well, maybe you should," Richards cut in, "before someone gets hurt." After the rancher left, Violet sat at her table, turning his words over in her mind. Owen building a place of his own. Not here with her, but on Richards' land. What did that mean for them? When Owen arrived the next day, she confronted him directly. "Your boss paid me a visit." Owen's expression grew guarded. "Did he now?" He mentioned you're planning to build on his land. Setting down his hat, Owen sighed. "I was going to tell you, I've been saving my wages. Richards offered me a small plot as part of my pay. I hoped." "Hoped what, Owen?" Violet pressed, running a hand through his hair. Owen met her gaze squarely. "I hoped you might consider joining me there, as my wife." The words hung in the air between them. Violet stared at him, her heart pounding. "Your wife," she repeated. "I know it hasn't been long," Owen said quickly. "And I know you've worked hard to make this place yours. I wouldn't ask you to give it up if you don't want to. I could live here instead, help you work this land, or we could split our time between both places. I just know I want to be with you, Violet, for the rest of my days." Tears welled in Violet's eyes. "Oh, Owen," fear flashed across his face. "If it's too soon, no," Violet interrupted, moving to him and taking his hands. "It's not too soon, not when you know something is right." Hope replaced fear in Owen's eyes. "Is that a yes?" "Yes," Violet said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, I'll be your wife." Owen swept her into his arms, spinning her around the small cabin as joy bubbled up between them. When he set her down, his expression grew serious again. "There's something else," he said. "Something I should have told you before, but I was afraid." Violet's happiness faltered. "What is it?" Taking a deep breath, Owen explained. "Before the war, my family owned slaves. Not many, we weren't rich planters, but enough that I grew up thinking it was the natural order of things." Shame colored his voice. "I fought for the Confederacy, believing I was defending my home, my way of life. It took years after the surrender for me to understand how wrong we were." Violet was silent, processing this revelation. "I understand if this changes things," Owen continued. If you can't, it doesn't change who you are now, Violet interrupted. We've all made mistakes, believed things we shouldn't have. What matters is that you learned, you changed. Relief washed over Owen's face. I don't deserve you. Probably not, Violet agreed with a small smile, but you're stuck with me anyway. They were married in April, as the first wildflowers peeked through the melting snow. The ceremony took place in Silver Creek's small church, with Mr. Richards standing as Owen's witness and the shopkeeper's wife, Mrs. Bell, attending Violet. The townspeople who had predicted Violet's demise watched in amazement as she exchanged vows with the tall cowboy who had found her buried in snow. Never would have believed she'd make it, Mayor Collins muttered to his wife. Shows what we know. After the ceremony, Owen surprised Violet by leading her not toward the double cross but back to their cabin. I thought we were going to your new plot, Violet said, puzzled. Owen shook his head. This is home, he said simply. Our home. I spoke with Richards. I'll still work for him, but we'll live here. This land is yours, ours now. You fought too hard for it to give it up. Tears of happiness blurred Violet's vision as Owen lifted her from her horse and carried her across the threshold of the cabin that had nearly become her tomb, but was now the beginning of their life together. Summer brought prosperity to the homestead. The garden Violet planted thrived under her care, yielding vegetables that she preserved for the coming winter. Owen built a proper corral and brought home 2 horses of their own, a gentle mare for Violet and a sturdy gelding for himself. They repaired the roof, added a lean-to kitchen, and began planning for a proper barn. Word of Violet's survival and subsequent marriage spread throughout the territory. Other women, some widows like herself, others newly arrived with husbands, sought her advice on gardening, preserving food, and surviving the harsh Montana winters. You've become quite the frontier celebrity, Owen teased one evening as they sat on their new porch, watching the sunset paint the hills gold and crimson. Hardly, Violet laughed. They're just surprised I didn't die. So am I sometimes, Owen admitted, his expression growing serious. When I think about how close I came to riding past this place that day. Violet squeezed his hand. But you didn't, you found me. Best thing I ever did, Owen said, pulling her close. As summer waned and the first hints of autumn touched the foothills, Violet discovered she was with child. The news filled them both with joy and trepidation. A baby, Owen marveled, his hand resting gently on Violet's still flat stomach. Our baby, are you happy? Violet asked, watching his face closely. More than I can say, Owen assured her, though I'm a little terrified too. That makes 2 of us, Violet admitted. A winter birth won't be easy out here. Owen's expression grew determined. We'll make sure you have everything you need. If necessary, we'll move to town temporarily or to the ranch, whatever keeps you and the baby safe. As her pregnancy progressed, Violet found herself remembering those desperate days buried in snow. How close she had come to giving up, to becoming just another tragic tale of frontier hubris. Instead, she had found love, purpose, and now new life growing within her. The winter of 1879 proved milder than its predecessor. When the first snow fell in November, the Jamesons were well prepared. Their root cellar was stocked with preserved vegetables, the smokehouse filled with cured meat, and the woodshed overflowing with split logs. Owen had insisted on additional precautions for Violet's comfort: extra blankets, a rocking chair placed near the hearth, medicinal supplies recommended by the midwife in Silver Creek. You're fussing too much, Violet protested, as Owen added yet another layer of insulation to the bedroom walls. I'm making sure history doesn't repeat itself, he replied firmly. No wife of mine is going to be trapped in a freezing cabin on my watch. December brought their first child into the world, a daughter they named Eleanor after Owen's mother. The birth was difficult but uncomplicated, with the midwife arriving just in time to help deliver the squalling, red-faced infant into her father's trembling hands. She's perfect, Owen whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he cradled his daughter. Look what we made, Violet. As the winter deepened outside, the small family grew closer within the warmth of their cabin. Eleanor thrived, growing plumper and more alert each day. Owen took to fatherhood with natural ease, singing soft Georgian lullabies and whittling tiny wooden animals for her when she was old enough to play. One evening, as a gentle snow fell outside and Alina slept peacefully in her cradle, Owen pulled Violet into his arms by the fire. "Do you remember what you said when I found you?" he asked, his voice low to avoid waking the baby. Violet shook her head. "I was half delirious with cold and hunger. You said I'm alive, just that." Owen's arms tightened around her. "I keep thinking about those words, how simple and profound they were." "I'm still alive," Violet murmured, leaning into his embrace, "more alive than I've ever been." "We both are," Owen agreed. "Sometimes I think I was just going through the motions before I found you, existing, not living." Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside the cabin, once a place of desperate survival, a family built on love and resilience faced the winter without fear. As spring approached once more, Violet stood at the door of their cabin, Alina bundled against her chest, watching Owen mend the corral fence. The snow was melting rapidly, revealing patches of mud and the first tender shoots of new grass. A year ago, she had been alone, fighting for survival against a wilderness that seemed determined to claim her. Now she had a husband who loved her, a daughter who brought joy to every day, and a home that was truly hers in every sense that mattered. The townsfolk who had wagered against her survival now spoke of that Paxton woman with reluctant admiration. "Tough as nails," they'd say. "Wouldn't have bet on it, but she proved us all wrong." Violet smiled at the thought. Yes, she had proved them wrong with Owen's help. But more importantly, she had proved something to herself, that she was stronger than she knew, capable of not just surviving but thriving in this wild, beautiful land. As if sensing her thoughts, Owen looked up from his work and waved. Violet waved back, Alina's tiny hand clasped in hers to mimic the gesture. "Your daddy found us in the snow," she whispered to her daughter, "and in finding us, he found himself too." The cabin that had nearly become her tomb now stood as a testament to second chances, to love found in the most desperate circumstances, to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of nature's harshest challenges. No one had believed she would survive that winter. But she had done more than survive, she had flourished, finding in the process not just the strength to endure, but the courage to love again. As Violet watched her husband cross the yard toward them, his face lighting up at the sight of his wife and daughter, she knew with absolute certainty that the life they had built together, against all odds, was worth every hardship she had endured. And when next winter came, they would face it together, without fear, a family forged in snow and strengthened by love, as enduring as the mountains that surrounded their home.